Kick off the webinar this afternoon. Nice to see so many of you on the call. I'm Anya Kemble, and thank you for joining us today. So I'm one of the senior consultants at Mutual Ventures, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. And I'm excited to be joined by technology experts DXW, who have experience building, designing, and producing content for government websites and services. I'm joined by Gaz Ashton, Head of Interaction Design, and Louise Duffy, Content Design Principal. And they'll both say hello and explain a bit about what they do in a moment. So during today's webinar, we're going to explore key elements of an effective recruitment support hub website, which will basically act as your kind of front door to your fostering recruitment services in your clusters. Topics we're going to cover today include developing your website structure, developing your website content, how you ensure your regional website is accessible for prospective foster carers, and how you can test your website before go live. We won't be talking about the website design or the kind of look and feel of the website, as DfE's creative agency will be providing website skins to clusters as part of the comms toolkit they are developing. If you do have questions about the communications campaign element of the programme, do get in touch with your coaches who can kind of support you in the first instance. Okay, before we get into intros, I thought I'll just remind everybody of the kind of purpose of the programme and why we're all really here and doing all this hard work. So as you know, this is about increasing the recruitment of foster carers to provide more loving homes for our most vulnerable children. A central focus of the programme is creating recruitment support hubs, which will act as a service across groups and local authorities to manage the recruitment of foster carers and the foster carer journey from initial inquiry through to application. And a key part of this is the recruitment support hub, which will be kind of a single point of contact with a single regional website for those inquiring to foster. So thank you to those of you who've already submitted questions for our attendees. If you have questions during the discussions, please pop them in the chat and I'll try and get to as many of them as possible. As usual, if I don't get to all of them, we'll follow up with some kind of output afterwards. And you can also chat to your coaches who will be able to put you in contact with the attendees today if you've got specific questions. Cool. So I'm going to turn now to our panelists to introduce themselves. So Gaz, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Gaz Ashton. As Annie said, I'm Head of Interaction Design here at DXW. And interaction design is essentially about making these digital services and websites that we're talking about accessible, intuitive, and easy for folks to use.
Cool. Thanks, Gaz. And Louise, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Louise and I'm Content Design Principal at DXW. And yeah, I do the kind of word side of what Gaz said. So we help people with language, make sure, the language is like clear and accessible, and also things like information, make sure it's structured and that kind of thing.
Great, thanks both. So to kick us off as a bit of an introductory question, we know that all the clusters are thinking about their regional website or front door, whatever you want to call it, and about how important it is to get this right for prospective foster carers, particularly where they know they want to know more about fostering. They might not have fostered before or know anyone who does foster. I wonder what you both think about the kind of first steps clusters should be taking when they begin to think about their website structure and develop the content for their front door website. I don't know, Louise, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. We've got about 6 principles for this question, so we've got a few things to say. So Gaz and I will kind of hop between us. One of the first things it's good to think about is something called a minimum viable product. So that's a bit kind of jargony, but that's sort of how DXW works. So what we mean by that is think about what you need to be able to launch your website on day one. And then once you have that, you can keep adding more and more content or more information to the website. So something that might be quite useful to do is to start with a content plan. So think about what content you have or what you would like to have on the website, and then start to prioritize that. So maybe think about, what's a lower priority, what's a higher priority. And the stuff that's kind of higher priority should be your sort of minimum viable version of your website. And then once you've got your sort of minimal version, you want to think about how you can keep improving that. So you might want to think about sort of dates or a realistic timescale for having a new version. Whenever we're building like services and websites, for example, we always do that. So we have a day one version, and then we kind of plan ahead to think about what should be in the following versions, what do we need to improve. If we get any feedback as well, there's also the chance to improve what's already there, and then to also keep expanding on the live service or website. I'm going to hand over to Gaz, who's going to talk about the next couple of principles.
Thanks, Sue. So it's really important to think about what the purpose of the content on your web pages are. What do you want people to do as a consequence of reading that content? Is there a call to action that someone needs to take? Is it simple as clicking a button or filling out a form, contacting somebody for a bit more information? Is it getting information or documents ready before you continue with your application? It's really important that every piece of your content has a purpose. We don't write this content and plan this content just for it to be read. We generally, when we're making these kind of things, we want somebody to do something as a result of interacting with it. So make sure you understand what the purpose of the content and the page in isolation is. Try and start with the concept of a page trying to do just one thing, and try and refer to what that one thing is whenever you're writing, so that you can make sure that what you put on a page meets that particular need. It's important to remember that websites are generally always a work in progress, and they're never ever finished. That sounds quite daunting, but they aren't static things, and they really do change over time. So even if you don't have anything that's new to publish, then you still need to maintain and review your content on a regular basis to make sure that it's up to date and still relevant. Make sure that you leave enough time for editing or getting a colleague or subject matter expert to check your content before you publish it. And it's a good idea to set some kind of reminder to make sure that you're checking your website content, or at the very least make a note of when it was last updated. Louise.
Thanks, guys. Something else to think about is using clear, simple, accessible and inclusive language. And we've got links to tools and things that you can use. So we'll do a follow-up and send you links to the things that we're talking about. But one of the things that's quite helpful to think about is using the language that people use. So how do people refer to fostering? You know, what type of search terms are they using? And there's something called Google Trends, which is, I think it's free to use, and it shows you the number of searches that people make in particular areas based on like phrases and things like that. So it's really helpful to see, yeah, exactly how people are referring to fostering and related topics as well. I actually used it to search for fostering and foster a child, and they came up with slightly different results as well. So it's worth kind of looking at a few different kind of phrases and seeing, you know, which ones are the most popular and how people tend to refer to that kind of stuff. It's also good to think about when people search fostering, for example, they might be referring to like fostering a pet, you know, so you want to kind of make sure that people are getting to your website because they're wanting to, you know, foster a child, and it might be something that you think about that you only refer to as fostering a child, not just fostering, you know, a standalone term. Yeah, it's worth just doing a bit more sort of digging into that kind of thing. And if you use clear and simple language that like almost anyone can understand, it just makes it easier for people to absorb information and to get the information that they need. There's also a tool called Hemingway, which can help with this. So it kind of helps to highlight where any of your language is maybe not as simple as it could be, or, you know, if you have like long sentences, that kind of thing. It's a really helpful tool to help you see exactly what your writing looks like. And also some other things to think about with language are avoiding jargon. So when you're a, you know, kind of subject matter expert, you kind of forget that the general public might not be familiar with terms or phrases and that kind of thing. So trying to make things clear to people who are not kind of in your world is really important. Also think about giving people the information that they need, not necessarily all the information that you have available. So there's obviously, you know, lots and lots to say about fostering a child, but it's good to think about what people actually need and when, you know, when you need that information. So that might help you a bit with the sort of website structure if you think about the sort of user journey that people might go through. And then also thinking about like language that includes people rather than excluding them. So there's lots of guides on inclusive writing that it's worth having a read of, especially when it comes to things like, you know, how do you, or the most sort of inclusive way of asking someone about their sex, their gender, their sexuality, that sort of thing. And I know that can be a common question on a fostering application. So the inclusive writing guides are really helpful for helping you make sure that you're not excluding anyone by asking those kind of questions. And then I mentioned structure there. I think it is good to think about what people need to do rather than you structuring the content how you like to think about it. So it's good to think about having quite a sort of I don't mean narrow, but quite a shallow structure is what I'm trying to say. So you don't want to have too deep a structure. You know, you don't want to have someone to have to click through 6 or 7 different links to get to a particular page. You want information just a few clicks away. You want it to be searchable by search engines, that kind of thing. The sort of deeper you make your structure, the harder it is for search engines to find it. And also, you know, if you're using the language that users use, then it's much easier to find as well. It's also helpful to think about kind of cross-posting on particular like pages and sections as well. So, you know, it's likely that people will be coming back to your websites fairly often just to, you know, because they'll be considering fostering. It's kind of not something that people would do after visiting your website once necessarily. So it's good to kind of always have sort of related links or relevant content in different sections. So that people can always find the sort of next step for what they want to do. You know, the next step might be like applying, or it could be, you know, finding out if you're eligible, those sorts of things. It just sort of helps people go on that kind of user journey if they know where to click next. And yeah, and like making the information available at the right time. So like Gaz was saying earlier, think about the purpose. So you don't want to have any kind of dead ends on your website. So you always want to have a kind of a call to action or a related link or something like that, so that people always have somewhere to go once they're on that page and they know sort of what the next steps are for their fostering journey. Gaz.
Thanks, Lou. For those last 3 points about information only being a few clicks away and signposting to other relevant content, and particularly thinking about the user journey that people might make when they want to be foster parents, it's always a good idea to try and involve, or at the very least to try and keep informed, the people that are responsible for the website user experience at the same time as you're developing the content. And that really helps the designs to deliver that content in the most sympathetic and effective way. So multidisciplinary working and overlapping of those kind of specialisms is always a good idea, but particularly to cover those 3 points that Louise just made.
Thanks both. That was really interesting, and lots of, I think, really useful principles to think about. In particular, I think that point you've just made, Gaz, about the user journey. I think it's important for all clusters not to just think about the website as one component of your hub, but think about, you know, the journey that someone will go through in your hub, and therefore the information that might be useful for them at stages in that journey. And also, I think Louise's point about, you know, the shallow level of content and structure is really important. You can always add things, but I think if you make something quite deep and complex from the get-go, it's actually harder to take it away than it is to add over time. So I definitely think looking at your journey, thinking about the key information you need for day one, and then having that plan that Louise referred to, looking forward about, you know, when you're going to add your content, and also why. The key is making sure you know the purpose of why you're adding that content. Cool, that's really helpful. Thank you. I suppose then the next question is about who should be involved in content development and at what point should they be involved. So, for example, should clusters be involving foster carers for things like case studies or testing?
I'll start us off. So I think it's a great idea to have foster carers involved if you have access to them. I think it's really quite powerful to hear from people who've gone through something previously, and I think it's great to have, you know, testimonials, case studies, images, videos, if you're able to have any of those things. I think it really helps people to understand what's involved, and it's helpful to be able to read and see what's happened to people previously. And I think it's good to think about the type of content that you expect from people like foster carers, if that's what you want to, or if that's who you want to help you create content. So like testimonials, for example, are great because it's very much written from that person's perspective of becoming a foster parent. And then case studies are great to refer to. You know, you might have case studies based on particular aspects of fostering. And then, yeah, like things like videos are really great explainers for like how to type kind of content, you know, so they can be quite powerful as well. And I think just making the content available in different formats, you know, because people, some people are very visual, some people prefer to read stuff. So I think having a combination of formats is really helpful for people if you are going to use foster carers. And I think if you are, one of the things to consider is that it will probably take a lot longer to get that content from people. So I would definitely overestimate how much time you think you'll need to create that content. Everyone's very busy, aren't they? So yeah, it would just probably take a bit longer to get that type of content, and that might not be something you'd want for like your day one version of the website, but maybe eventually that's something you could add further down the line. And I think if using foster carers, it's good to ask for like written consent from them, so that you can explain to them what you're expecting from them, and they understand exactly what you're going to be using and why as well. So, is it just your website that will be using this content? Will you put it on social media? Is there anywhere going to put it on posters? I think it's just good to explain to people exactly what the purpose of something is and how that content is going to be used. And I think as well that it's good to consider the sort of unique aspect of someone's experience and how it might be able to help future foster carers. So, for example, was there anything surprising to a foster carer about what they had to do to apply? And that's the kind of thing that might drive your content. You might want to create content around that. Things like, what stage took the longest? What was the quickest thing? Those sorts of things. I think that's really interesting for people to get a sort of insider perspective on what it's actually like becoming a foster carer, and also helping people from like underrepresented groups identify with other foster carers who successfully fostered. I think that's quite a powerful thing, so that people can see and hear that fostering's for everyone, and like no one's excluded based on particular aspects of their lives or anything. And yeah, I think that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Gaz.
Yeah, just one thing to add for this question from me, and that was that I'm not a fostering expert, but I think if I were working on a website that was connected to it, I'd want to make sure that I kept in mind that, as well as all the factual aspects of this subject matter, there's a massive emotional aspect to it as well. And that is one thing in particular that I would be like leaning on those fosterers that you work with in order to help properly convey their experiences of that aspect when it comes to putting together the content and the design of these websites. I think it's massively important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, and as you said, Louise, underrepresented groups and making sure that they can see people that reflect them and their experiences is really important, particularly because we're talking about clusters across the country with diverse communities and different challenges. So I think that's really key. And just in terms of some of the stuff you've spoken about in terms of case studies and working with foster carers to develop those, I know lots of the clusters and local authorities on the call will do this already, but I think also I'd encourage clusters to think about how you can use your foster carer reference groups that you've set up for this development phase, get them involved, get them testing and almost being kind of critical, but in a friendly way on, what you're developing and whether it's actually the right sort of information. Because as Louise said, sometimes things can feel relevant, but they're relevant to us in the kind of jobs we do rather than the relevant information necessarily for the end user. That's really helpful. Thank you. So next question then, how important is it that clusters consider what happens in the back end of the kind of journey for a prospective foster carer whilst they develop their front end foster carer facing website?
I'm going to kick us off with this one. So I think it's quite important. The first thing to think about is that users won't differentiate between front end and back end in the way that the creators and providers of the service would do. In an ideal world, those people will never even see the joins between the front and the back end. So it's really important to try and consider the journey for your users from their perspective and try and imagine it as a joined up whole from end to end, start to finish. We always find that having a map or a diagram of an end-to-end journey and all the possible routes through it and dead ends and things like that is really helpful. It can help make less abstract the ideas of like dead ends and so forth. And then when you actually do test with users, that will help to validate that kind of diagram, that mapping. And making a map, you may have seen kind of service blueprints or diagrams and that kind of thing, and some of them look really, really fancy and high fidelity, but it doesn't, all you need is a marker pen and some post-it notes to actually make a map. It doesn't require any particular craft skills. All you need to be able to do is talk to each other and put things on the wall and point at them. And pointing at them is a really good thing. Like a map is a really good and tangible artifact that you can point at when you're discussing your service. Can help get people on the same page and make things feel a bit more real than just like I say, an abstract kind of conversation.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Louise?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, think about your offline channels as well. So not everyone's, comfortable using a website. Not everyone's comfortable reading online and that kind of thing. So think about like your website and how it can support, any helplines that you have, or if there's like a team who can deal with inquiries for that, for fostering. Yeah, it's good to kind of link them up with the website just to make sure that it's kind of quite a nice process so that people can get help whenever they need it, that's not just on the website.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. And I know in Foster with the Northeast, the kind of pilot, I know they've got, for example, information packs that people can download. So they don't necessarily need to sit on the website and reading through content. There's the kind of key content in there, which I think is really good. And one of the questions we had in the chat was just about, I suppose, an example of an end-to-end diagram. I'd say, firstly, I know lots of clusters will have process maps. So they've kind of mapped out how does someone come to the regional website, and then what are the steps they follow. But also we can pick up after if there are some good examples that Gaz and Louise can share as clusters develop their websites as well. That's really helpful. Thank you. So next question, what processes should clusters follow to test and ensure their websites are ready for go live? Yeah,
I'll start here. Testing is obviously a really good idea. We would suggest that you test as much as you can, both before and after going live. Obviously, the ideal scenario is that you iron out everything before you go live, but we know from experience that that just doesn't happen. Once the site's live, you can get really valuable feedback from the people as they'll be using it on, for example, preferred devices in the context that they would actually be using the site. It's very different. A sanitized kind of testing environment is very different to someone sat on their sofa at home with a TV on and the dog barking and like a child pulling on their sleeve or whatever. So you only really get that once the site's truly live. And as I think we mentioned before, try and test with people who have either become or are already foster carers, because they'll spot things that are missing. And with the prospective foster carers, they will give you a bit of a steer as to what they think of the content that's on the website and maybe what isn't actually there that they would like to have seen. Lou?
Yeah, and it's good to try and test with people who have accessibility needs if you have access to anyone like that. So, for example, if someone has a visual impairment, they might use something called a screen reader, which will read out the content that's on a website to someone, and that'll give you an idea of how accessible your website and content is. And also things like physical disabilities. So, for example, if someone has some sort of like motor issue with, motor issues, it can be hard for them to like click on buttons and things like that. So it's quite good to get access to people with different kind of needs to make sure that your overall website is accessible, not just, the writing or the design or anything like that. And also people who are neurodivergent as well. People absorb information differently, and you basically just want to make the language as clear as possible to everyone. So yeah, it's good to test with people who have accessibility needs if you have access to them. And then when it comes to the testing, it's good to think about the specifics that you want to test. So, and how you get that feedback as well. So for example, you might want to test how easy it is for people to find the application form to become a foster carer, or you might want to test if your content's easy to understand. And I think those are kind of like valid things to test for, but you want to kind of just make sure you've got a sort of question that you want to get the answers to, and then test and figure out how you're going to get the feedback from that, and try not to test everything in one go, because it would just be it's too much, I think, for people to take on to give you feedback on absolutely everything on your website. And yeah, if you are doing any testing with, the general public or anything like that, it's good to get consent so they understand what happens during testing sessions. And yeah, we've got some links to like examples of consent forms that you can use with people as well.
Great, thank you. That would be really helpful. One of the questions we've had in the chat just while we've been talking through kind of testing and different types of users is around the fact that lots of people who might apply to foster haven't grown up in a world where IT was as kind of advanced as it is now. So they might look at a website and actually want to speak to someone directly. I don't know if you had any thoughts on kind of finding that balance between providing information on a website, but also considering how you make it clear to people where they can speak to someone and pick up the phone.
Yeah, I think it's making sure that people have that access to like alternative routes to finding out information and alternative formats as well. So I think some like housing associations do this quite well, where they have their website and then they usually have, customer service helplines and that kind of thing. And often I know that like councils have dedicated support teams and things. So I think it's just making sure that all that information is visible and letting people see what support is available to them. Because people do prefer to contact people in their own way, don't they? So I think it's good to just make sure that it's visible enough for people to see if they do want to, email, or I don't know if you do face-to-face or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's just making sure that all those options are visible for people. And it might be kind of content that you have like on every page of the website, because someone could be quite comfortable using a website, but then they get to a particular point and they might have some questions that they want answered. They might be quite personal questions. They wouldn't want to, maybe email someone or whatever, or maybe they'll prefer to email. It's good to think about that content being available throughout the whole sort of like foster care and journey. So making it quite prominent and making sure that people know that there's lots of alternative routes, not just the website to get the information.
That's really useful. Thank you. And I think that's important. I know every cluster will have a kind of single regional phone line as well. So thinking about if someone calls up or if someone goes to a face-to-face event, how do you get that information so that you can kind of monitor and track in your back end, but it's not a complex journey where a foster carer kind of goes to the website and isn't sure what to do, or phones up and has a different experience. It's about how do you create a consistently good user journey. That's really helpful. Thank you. And we touched on it a bit in some of the stuff that you were both just saying. But a key element of website development is about ensuring it's accessible to users with assisted technology. How can clusters ensure they build an accessible website and test it? And I suppose also sometimes this is a thing people think about at the last minute, but how important is it to make sure that your websites are accessible?
It's really important. It's not just important, it's a legal requirement that your websites and the digital services are accessible to everyone that needs to use them. Accessibility really is a sliding scale. There are some very basic things that you almost get for free these days with web development. Then to a degree, it depends on the diligence of the developer and designer who is making the website. And then beyond that, you get into like realms of specialist accessibility testing. And there's an organisation called Digital Accessibility Centre, or DAC, who we at DXW have used several times to test medium to large scale services that we've worked on, and they will give you access to people with all sorts of needs and impairments who can test your service using all the different kind of assisted technology that they would use. So we would highly recommend, definitely recommend looking for some specialists to help or at least advise with that kind of thing. If your internal teams feel that they can't do a comprehensive kind of accessibility assessment. There are standards for accessibility that exist, and they're known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. You might hear them referred to as WCAG, catchy title. And there are several different standards and levels for producing accessible content, like A+, AA, AAA, so on and so forth. Remember that accessibility is never really done in the same way that a website is never really finished. You should be prepared to continuously assess and improve your service's accessibility when you learn more about the needs of the people who try to use it. Right.
Yeah, and just to build on what Gaz is saying, the WCAG, which I hate saying, it's a horrible acronym. There are some sort of basic principles that can help really make your content accessible just from like the language perspective. So I mentioned screen readers earlier, and what they do is when they come to a link on a website, they will read out the link, but they often pull out all the links on a page into one big list. So for example, if you use the word here as a link, or like click here, all the screen reader will do is read out all of those links with the same text, so the users won't have the context of where they're potentially linking through to. So one of the things you can do to make it more accessible is just add some context to those links. So, you know, something like find out more about foster caring, or apply to become a foster carer, you know, that sort of thing. That helps massively with accessibility. Things like using short sentences and paragraphs to break up text, make content much easier to read, which just kind of helps everyone. If you're adding images to your website, there's something called alt text or alternative text, which you should, I think most sort of content management systems and websites have a way of adding that. That's just a way to add like text description to an image, so that people who can, you know, see the image, or for example might have a rubbish internet connection and the image hasn't loaded, it just means that they get a text version of the image. And then also, if you are doing something like videos, then just make sure that a transcript is available, and if you can add captions to the videos, all these things just kind of help make things that bit more accessible. And also, if you're using other formats, so if you're uploading documents or PDFs or anything like that, PDFs can be quite inaccessible just because of the format of them, especially if someone's, you know, using a phone, for example, to access the content. Make sure that you provide a contact for someone who can send that information in an alternative format. So, you know, if you have a PDF, it might be easier for someone to read that content in a Word document, for example, because PDFs, yeah, they just sort of structure things in a way which means that not everyone can access them. So as long as you have a way for someone to get in touch with you and provide an alternative format, then that's a way of making something more accessible. You know, it might not be 100% accessible, but it's definitely on the road to being more accessible.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And just to pick up on one of the points that you alluded to, Gaz, about this being a, you know, important but also a legal requirement. I suppose for day one and thinking about that MVP, do you have suggestions about the key things that clusters should be making sure they're doing, and some of the things that they can kind of build into future plans? And is that also information that you can access in some of the guidance that you mentioned?
Yeah, we'll put all sorts of links into our guidance, but like some of the things that Louise has just described are like what I would call day one accessibility stuff, getting your alt text right, making sure that links also have descriptive text, simple things like font size and color contrast. All of that, I suppose, will be handled by the kit that the DfE are providing, but it's always worth keeping an eye on, because sometimes you have to step outside the realms of the kind of guidance that you get in order to achieve what you need to achieve. There are a billion accessibility checklists available on the internet. And like I say, it's never a kind of one and done thing. My advice would be to get as much as you can done, and then think about how you achieve the kind of the longer tail of the less common requirements as you go along.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I suppose some of this also comes out by learning when you go live, and the point that Louise made earlier about actually sometimes the best time and the time when you realize things that don't work is when you've got something properly up and running, you've got your marketing running, pointing lots of different types of prospective carers to your website.
Absolutely. And one other thing just to add is that it's probably a good idea to have some kind of mechanism device on your site that says, if you're having trouble accessing this website, let us know. And you know, if somebody is having a problem, then they will let you know exactly what that problem is, and that gives you the opportunity to address it.
That's a really good point, and something that's really useful to get that live kind of feedback and learning. Some comments from listeners that I thought I'd just cover. One of them quite interesting, and I don't know if you have thoughts, Louise. So they were talking about how in their local authority they used Google Trends to look at what forums people are communicating on about your topic. So the example they gave is using Mumsnet, where there's kind of a fostering topic or board to see exactly what sort of questions people are asking. I suppose, is that a useful way, a different way, I suppose, of testing or understanding what content is important that's not directly with the user, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think forums and things like that are amazing sources of information. Sometimes really good sources of misinformation as well. You might get someone in a Mumsnet forum saying something that really isn't true. And that's a good opportunity for you to make sure that you're mentioning that particular, thing that people have a misconception of about fostering. So yes, I think anywhere that you can go to and see how people are talking about fostering and the kind of questions that they have or the things that they don't know that they don't know as well. It's quite hard to understand what people don't know when they don't know anything about a particular thing. So yeah, I think that's a great resource, like forums like Mumsnet and anywhere online that you think of where people might be discussing this topic. It'll give you a really great insight into what people are asking, what people are worried about. They might be like anxious or something like that. So I think that's a really great thing that you're doing. So yeah, well done.
Cool, thank you. And there's another question. So someone's asked if you've got any advice on cookies and tracking on websites to help learn about what's working well to send traffic to the website and nurture kind of quality leads. I don't know if either of you had any thoughts on kind of cookies and tracking or anything, even just the standard of what people should be doing in relation to cookies and tracking on a website.
I'm afraid I can't really speak to that. You'd have to ask somebody that has a bit more specialism in marketing than me.
Cool, that's helpful, thank you. We can pick that one up after.
Yeah, sorry, I think one thing with the cookies is being explicit about what they're for and how they're going to be used. And things like privacy statements are quite important as well, just so that people might be giving you personal information, just making sure that people understand what information they're giving you, like how long you store it, where it goes, that kind of thing. That's my sort of basic understanding of, cookies and privacy and things. But I think it is really important to be explicit about that and just make sure that people have access to your privacy statements and that kind of thing.
Cool, thank you. And as I say, we can come back with a bit more detail on that one once we've spoken to someone who knows more. Another question in the chat, and this might be something Louise and Gaz working with government that you've experienced, is that often local authority web teams will say they can't or won't add content or images that don't fit their kind of local authority guidelines. And I know that sometimes they can be quite strict. So do you have any advice on how you can overcome that problem or work with those local authority teams to kind of reach a solution?
Yeah, there's something called Creative Commons, which is kind of like open source images. There's a few sort of libraries and things that you can access. We can send you links to those. But yeah, it basically just means that you can use images for free without having to pay any royalties or anything like that. The only condition is that you attribute them. So just make sure that you say where you got the image from. Some of the photographers might want to be credited, that kind of thing, because you can still get sued if you use those images without properly attributing them. So there's lots of like libraries that use the Creative Commons images, and they might have suitable images. It is a problem that like a lot of our clients talk about, and there's other sort of things that you might want to do if you can get images of like real people. I don't know if there's a way of like using illustrations, if you have access to someone who could create that type of content for you. Some of our clients have done that. Also, if you do have, access to your foster carer sort of representative groups, if they're comfortable with images, it's always good to have, real people in the images. So they might be a source of, images for you as well. But it is difficult. If you do really struggle, Creative Commons might be your best bet for that. But yeah, it's a thing that lots of people find really difficult, and like you don't want to use just those sort of stock images that you see everywhere as well. So finding images that are kind of appropriate and kind of conveying what you want them to convey can be quite tricky.
Thanks, Louise, that's helpful. And I suppose the other thing to say that I know some clusters are doing is testing kind of images and things like that with actual foster carers. I think collecting that feedback directly from the people that you're trying to reach out to is also important to support those conversations. As Louise said, it's a bit of a back and forth and quite difficult, but I think having some evidence and some feedback from foster carers can be helpful as well to support why you think an image or other information is relevant on specific websites. I just wanted to ask a bit about how clusters make sure they're confident that their websites are in a good place for go live, particularly, I suppose, from a testing and ensuring that they're not going to launch and then everything's going to go wrong. I don't know if you had any thoughts about key things that clusters can do to make sure that they can be confident that they're ready to launch their websites.
Shall I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned testing briefly earlier, and we were speaking really about usability testing and making sure that your site is getting the information across that users need, and that the interactions are simple and straightforward. But there's also things you can do in terms of technical testing, like penetration testing, making sure that you've done security checks, reliability testing, so making sure that your site doesn't fall over if all of a sudden, in the unlikely or maybe likely event that 500,000 people hit the website on the day of launch, that it doesn't just completely collapse. So there's all kinds of technical testing in that would probably be, I would imagine, be part of your developers' normal day-to-day work. But just, I think, accept the fact that going live is just the first step, and that's actually where your best opportunity to start testing and learning begins. Everything before that is in the nicest possible way a guess. It's guesswork. You're just giving it your best guess until you launch, and then after that, it's your opportunity to really sharpen it up.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, sometimes it's helpful not to promote your site on day one, because there could be lots of things that come up that you weren't aware of. So if you are, getting your marketing materials ready, you might want to just have a bit of a delay on those, whether it's a couple of weeks or a couple of days or whatever, just to make sure that lots of people can, look at the website and test it, test it on different devices, different browsers, see if there's any weird sort of quirks or things that pop up. It always happens. I don't think we've ever, launched anything that hasn't, just something pops up that we hadn't noticed, before we went live with it. So yeah, if you do have that sort of little window where you can launch the website without sort of telling the public about it, then you might be able to iron out some of the issues that might pop up.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I know lots of the clusters are thinking about what kind of go live looks like, particularly around exactly what you said, Louise, maybe building that confidence, testing some of the key processes, and then thinking about doing, I suppose, what sometimes is called a big bang, pointing all these people, doing your big marketing campaign, doing your local BBC News or whatever it is. But having that confidence can really help iron out any major technical issues before launching. So that's been really helpful, and it's been really useful to hear lots of your expertise. I suppose as a final kind of question or thought from me, we talked about lots of different stuff today, but what would you say is the one key thing you'd encourage clusters to think about when they're building their website, the key takeaway for you?
You want to go firstly?
Yeah.
I
Pressure.
think.
Yeah, I think I would say start small with your websites, because you can always add more content to it. If people are telling you there's not enough on there, that's an easy problem to solve. If people are telling you there's too much on there, that's a bit harder to remove content or information. So yeah, I'd start as small as you can, and then work towards adding more and more content, and hopefully getting some feedback from people as well. It's always good to be guided by the actual users as well. So yeah, start small.
Yeah, I can't choose one thing. I'm going to have to say two. First one would be, think about what we said at the very start about trying to be certain about what you want each page of your site to achieve. Have a clear goal for each one, because that will help you stop your website becoming bloated. And that's really important, because if it's just a dense wall of information, people won't know where to start, and they're more likely to just drop off. There's such a thing as kind of choice paralysis, or information overwhelm. Second thing is, you can never really test too much, so test before and after you launch, and yeah, be prepared to change course slightly when you have new information.
That's great and really helpful. Lots for people to think about. So that kind of wraps up our conversation for today. Thank you so much to Louise and Gaz for all of that interesting information. As they both said throughout the conversation, there was lots of mentions of tools, guidance, etc. We will pull something together and share that with all the clusters so that you can kind of have a dig into them yourself, read a bit around them, and particularly if you do have questions, DXW and Louise and Gaz are on board and can have conversations with clusters where helpful, and if you want some more technical support. In the first instance, if you've got additional questions or questions about your website and development, speak to your coaches and they can put you in touch with Louise and Gaz and colleagues in DXW. We will be releasing information about our next webinar, which will be in February shortly. We always welcome feedback and suggestions, particularly if there's other areas that you'd like us to cover in webinars, or any feedback on the webinars themselves. So please do drop your coach an email if you've kind of got specific things you'd like us to cover. And finally, just thank you to everyone for joining today, and thank you to Louise and Gaz for joining and sharing lots of their important information about content and website development. As I said, if you've got any questions, any follow-ups, do email your coaches, and we'll see you at the next webinar in February. Thank you.
Thanks all. Best of luck.